Today is March the 9th, 2021. My name is Tanya Finchum, and I am with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at Oklahoma State University. With me is Steve Buzzard, who has been with OSU for around 38 years now, with 23 of those being in the athletic department. From 1983 to 2006, Steve served as either the assistant or associate athletic director for media relations in the athletic department here. And he's currently the senior manager administration business for OSU's Department of Public Safety. This interview has been recorded with Zoom and will be part of the We Will Remember Promise Oral History collection. By way of context, January 21st, 2001, a plane crash carrying 10 men associated with the Oklahoma State University men's basketball program. And that day, the university and the Cowboy community made a promise to always remember these 10 great individuals. And during that time, Steve was director of athletic media relations here at OSU. So thank you for being with us today. But before we talk about the accident and the promise, tell us a little bit about yourself. Start wherever you like.
I'm a native Oklahoman, was born in Miami, Oklahoma. In 1956, lived most of my early adult life in Quapaw, which is in the very northeastern part of the state. Went to college and earned my degree from Northeastern State University, and my degree is actually I have a double major in journalism and speech with a minor in public relations. Worked in that field at my alma mater, NSU, until the fall of 1983. Came to Stillwater, the lure of the big time. Brought me here in 1983, and I had intended to stay 5 years. And as you say, 38, almost 39 years later, I'm still here, which I think tells you the lure and just how very special Oklahoma State University is, even to those who don't have a degree from here, but have become part of the family through their professional career. As you said, I served in athletics from 1983 to 2006, and all of that time either assisted or was responsible for the Office of Media Relations. And for those who don't know, that's really the middle people between the media and the coaches and student athletes and athletic programs at OSU. And so anything that had to do with our coaches or student athletes, dealing with the media went through our office and continues to do so now through that office. Personally, I'm married. I've been married almost 25 years. I have a wonderful wife, Kathy, and a daughter who lives in Tulsa with two beautiful grandsons. And so life is really good. And I've enjoyed OSU has been so good to me, and that's I will forever be grateful for the opportunity that it gave me 39 years ago, and continue to look forward to coming to work every day.
Well, then let's go back to 1983. How did you come to be at OSU in that process?
I had absolutely no idea. I was working in the media relations role, the director of media relations at NSU in Tahlequah, and was perfectly happy. My entire world was there. My roots were there. That's where I graduated. My friend group, my support group, everything was there. And a mutual friend called one day and said, don't know if you'd be interested or not, but there's an opening for an assistant's job at Oklahoma State. Full disclosure here, I had not grown up an OSU fan. I had grown up a fan of that other school. We are all entitled to at least one mistake, and that was mine. And I really struggled about it, and I applied for the job, but I applied sort of half-heartedly. It's like, I don't know if I really want to do that or not. Got an interview, came to Stillwater, interviewed for the position with Pat Quinn, who served as the media relations director here for a number of years prior to me. Didn't really know if the interview had gone that well or not. I went back to Tahlequah and just kind of forgot about it and didn't hear for a while. And one day out of the blue, Pat called and said, well, you really weren't my first choice, but if you want to, if you're interested, we'd love for you to come. It was a tough decision, but I just thought, I didn't want to get stagnant professionally, and I thought it would be an opportunity to expand, to grow my skills and to expand on what I had done. So I took the job and came to Stillwater the first Saturday of October in 1983. The further I drove away from Tahlequah and the closer I got to Stillwater, I thought I had moved to Mars.
Less trees.
Less trees, but it became apparent early on that God had a reason for bringing me here, and so Stillwater has just been, my life just sort of opened up. But it came from really just a whim. I'll apply for that, and if it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't, and it worked out.
Was it difficult buying your first piece of orange clothing?
At that point it wasn't, because I had started to lose that crimson shade, because we were green at the time. NSU was green, so I had a lot of green clothing, but I had already sort of lost the crimson, and so it wasn't that difficult to transition at all. And once you get here, once you experience the campus, and once you experience the close-knit family atmosphere. I have said throughout my career at OSU, from athletics to the 7 years I spent at the foundation actually dealing with donors, OSU is a special place with special people. And I'm not saying that other universities aren't that as well, but if you didn't grow up here, or you didn't go to school here, you have to be here to experience it, to realize just how close-knit the OSU family is.
Do you recall much from your interview? Was that the first time you had been to campus?
I'd been to campus. No. Again, full disclosure, I'd been to campus years before at a Bedlam football game when I was definitely on the wrong side. So I had exposure to OSU before, but that was the first time I spent any extended time here at all. And was and as we were talking before we started, OSU has changed so much in the last 4 years. And what hasn't changed is the spirit and the people, but the campus itself has changed dramatically. But even in 1983, the campus certainly an allure to it, and was certainly beautiful. And so I knew from the very beginning that it was a place that I could enjoy being. But as far as that interview, I remember. I remember bits and pieces of it, and I remember people questioning, are you ready for this? You coming from I didn't think it was a particularly small school, 8,000 enrollment, but compared to OSU, it was small. Are you ready for this? Are you ready for the pressure? And that's a question that you think you can answer, and I certainly thought that I was, and I knew that it's a bigger stage, but you can either do the job or you can't. And I had enough confidence to think that, whether it was where I had been or whether it was here, that I could certainly do the job. I would make mistakes, but I was confident enough to think that I could do the job.
And you had graduated from college in 83, or was it a year before that?
I graduated in 78.
78. Okay. And at that point, had you planned to be this type of work?
Yes, I did. Actually, after my first year in college, I knew that sports media relations is an interesting profession. You hear, or you used to hear, I don't know what it is now, that those who can play and those who can't write about it. I couldn't play. I didn't have the athletic skills to play. I tried and enjoyed it, but I certainly, when I was a senior in high school, I had after a football coach told me that my skills were very limited, so I switched over to the writing side and started to write for the campus, or for the high school newspaper, and carried that on into college. And I knew that writing is something that I enjoyed, and I certainly enjoyed sports, so it just seemed to match up. And so I started my second year in college. I started actually pointing to this as a career. And then when I graduated in '78, my dream job was to run the office at NSU, but it was occupied. And so I took a job that was certainly not what I wanted, but it was a job that I grew in as a sports writer at a newspaper in Joplin, Missouri, and learned a lot from that. But it happened that after I had been on that job for about a month, the NSU called and said, "Would you like to come back?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." So I went back in the summer of '78 and stayed until I came to OSU in '80.
Had you known someone in this a similar position? I mean, growing up?
No, I hadn't. To be honest with you, until I got to college, I didn't really know that this position existed. But I think that's also part of growing up in a small town. And there were 23 people in my high school graduating class, and we didn't. I loved it. I think it served me well, but there wasn't any exposure to this particular profession. I did not understand that until I actually got to college, and somebody said, "No, you can do this. You can make a career out of this. You're not ever going to get rich, but that if you're happy with what you do and you can pay the bills, it doesn't matter." And so,
had your parents gone to college?
My yes, but neither of them completed college. My mom grew up in Texas and had gone to school at McMurray in Abilene, Texas, and she always talked about how she wished she could have finished, but her family situation wouldn't allow it. And my dad went to a year of junior college and then got called to the war, World War II. And so when he came back, it was time to go to work and start a family. And so he didn't get to finish either. They were both highly intelligent people, and there was never any doubt that they wanted me to go and encouraged me to go. And frankly, there was never any doubt in my mind that I would go to college. That it was just an expectation.
And how did you finance college?
I worked. I started
Okay.
working when I was. My first job was sacking groceries when I was 13 years old, and I remember making 10 cents an hour, and I thought that was huge. But no, I worked all the way through, and then once I got to college, I had college work study, and I think they used to call it DEOG. I don't know if that's still out there or not. But no, I paid for most of my college, and I think, and I'm not sorry about that. It isn't, we weren't wealthy. My parents weren't wealthy. We had everything that we needed, not necessarily everything that I wanted, but that's just the way it goes. And they did help some along the way, but for the most part, I worked my way through college.
Did you have a mentor or a person that influenced your life the most?
In college, I had two. The first one, and I'll never forget him. He's still alive. His name was Monty Franks, and he was the sports information director at PEO, which is where I started before I went to industry, because it was so small, and that helped me. And he introduced me to this profession and taught me so much. And then actually was able to help me go on to MSU, where a gentleman by the name of Jim Patterson ran the office there, and he continued that professional mentorship and taught me things that I didn't know, and just how to do the job and the ins and outs and the deadlines, and how to thrive in that kind of pressure. So both of those gentlemen played a huge role in my professional development. I've had several personal mentors over the years too that have helped, but professionally, those two.
Well, if you want to mention the personal ones, you can, or it's up to you.
I think most of my mentors, or actually two of my mentors, were both were also my pastors, and so from my faith is very important to me, and so from that side of it, they've been instrumental, and actually very instrumental in getting through this period that we're going to talk about today. They were both very instrumental in helping me get through that.
Well, once you got to OSU in that position, did you have someone that kind of helped you along a little bit?
Well, Pat Quinn was my boss when I first got here, and he was known. The OSU Media Relations Office has been known for a long time as an innovator in being on the cutting edge. OSU Media Relations was the first operation of its kind in the nation to actually use a computer. And that had actually happened, I think, 2, maybe 3 years before I got here. And I remember they still had the original one when I got here, and it was this monstrosity that sat on a desk, and it was like, oh, I can't wait to get to figure out how to use that. And so OSU was on the cutting edge thanks to Pat. And the gentleman that preceded him, his name was Otis Weil, who was also a pioneer in they called it sports information. And they were both pioneers. They're both in the Sports Information Hall of Fame. And Pat, Pat taught me from this side, from the bigger stage, from the broader platform, some of the nuances that I had no idea of. And certainly it was apparent early on that the stage was bigger. And there were more people watching, and yeah, no one's perfect, and mistakes happen, but they better be mistakes of commission, not omission. You better be looking hard to try, and so I learned that right away, and certainly have always made mistakes, but Pat taught me, how to overcome some of those.
Who are some of the people you met on your first week or two here? I might not recognize the names, but I might.
Well, after the interview, other than Pat, probably the second person that I met was Coach Henry Ivan, and I hope everybody still remembers that name as certainly one of the all-time greats in college basketball and frankly in athletics period. And I met him in our office, maybe the second day I was here, and I'll never forget it. I'll never forget that meeting. He shook my hand, and he was very tall, and you just knew. He's one of those people that when he was in the room, even if you didn't know him, you knew that there was somebody in the room. He had that kind of charisma. And he shook my hand and said, and asked me, he was asking me questions and asked me where I went to school. And he told me, he said, well, you didn't go to school here, but you work here now, so you're one of us. And from that day forward, Mr. Iba and I, for whatever reason, I don't know why a Hall of Fame coach would take interest in a wet behind the ears rookie at this, but he did, and we became very good friends. And he passed away in 1993. But the last 7 years or so of his life, we probably had lunch at least once a week.
Oh.
And if nothing else at OSU had worked out, or in Stillwater, if nothing else had worked out, two things that would have made my move here worthwhile is A, I found my wife here, but B, I got an opportunity to meet and become friends with him. And I can remember him sitting in my office, and he knew when Mr. Iver was coming because he would laugh if he were still here to hear this, because he knew it. But he wore Old Spice aftershave, and he wore it really good. And I could smell him coming up the stairway, and so I knew he was on his way to my office. And he would sit in my office and would talk basketball with me, literally for hours. And I can remember early on thinking, I don't have time for this. I appreciate his interest, but it became apparent to me as I got to know who he was and what he meant to the game, that was a gift. To be able to sit and listen to him talk basketball and share his life with me and to grow a friendship was just incredible. And that's I remember things that he said to me even today. I was complaining after one morning after a basketball game, and the Cowboys had lost, and I thought the officiating was particularly bad, and I was complaining about the officials. And he could get a little rough, and he looked at me and he said, "Now you cut that out." He said, I've coached a whole lot more than you have because you never coached. And he said, "I'll tell you, an official never cost me a basketball." And I thought, okay, Well, if somebody that won as many games and lost as many games as he did can tell me that, then I can probably stop bagging on it. Right? He's probably right, but no. And the relationship with him when he passed, he meant so much to the college basketball circle, and I can remember. I would in his later years, I did most of his correspondence for him, and he would bring in letters from Mike Krzyzewski at Duke and Dean Smith at North Carolina, and he would be so frustrated because they would both have asked him to come sit on their bench when they played each other, and he said, "I can't do that. I can't choose. They're both my friends," and he mentored both of them. And he said, "Write them both a letter and tell them I'm not coming." And so I would do that. But the day passed. My first phone call, probably the guy that did more to keep Mr. Iva alive after Mr. Iva's wife passed away. Oh golly, it wasn't long after I got here, 85 maybe, and I'm probably going to miss the year, but Bobby Knight, who at the time was at Indiana and was particularly close to Mr. Iva, knew that after Mrs. Iva had passed, that Coach Iva just sort of became a hermit. He just really didn't want to get out, and he was kind of a recluse. And Coach Knight was coaching the Olympics, and he came to Stillwater before that Olympic team started. I guess it would have been '84. And he went to Mr. Iva's house and he said, "You're not going to sit in here and die. You're going to come to Bloomington and you're going to help me coach this Olympic team." And he did. And I think that extended Mr. Iva's life by a number of years because he was able to get interested in things again and participate on a very high stage. And of course, he coached in 3 Olympics, and he knew what that was all about, and he very much enjoyed that. But when Mr. Iva passed, the first person I called was Coach Knight, and he knew that he was in ill health. That I'll never forget. Coach Knight, generally, he was never at a loss for words, but he went silent for just maybe 15 seconds, and he said, "Here's all I'm going to say." And he said, "Please use this in any material that you put out about Mr. Iva." He said, "Of all of the shadows cast on the game of basketball, his was the light." And that quote is still associated with Coach Iva today. And I think it's still very accurate. If you look, the times have changed and the game is different, but all the innovation and all of the things, especially some of the things on defense that Mr. Iva did, I think they still impact the game today. And I'm so glad that Coach Knight recognized it.
Do you think he would have approved of that building being named for him?
No. He would have said that's nonsense, but he would have laughed and gone on about his way. He was so loyal to OSU, and he was, especially when Coach Sutton came back in 1990, he was just particularly pleased because he felt like that one of our own had come home, and he very much wanted. Coach Sutton had an opportunity to come, or wanted to come back in the 80s, and OSU didn't offer it. And then when OSU did try to hire him, not very many years before he actually came, he wasn't interested because he had things rolling pretty well at Kentucky. So finally, it worked out that he was able to come, and that might have been that day in 1990 when Mr. Iva introduced Coach Sutton as the new basketball coach here. That might have been one of the happiest days of his life.
And you were there. You were here by that time too.
I was here. Yeah, no, yeah. I was here. I remember I ran the press conference that day, and I remember visiting with Mr. Iva. Really didn't want a public role. He didn't really want a speaking role, but he did it because Coach Sutton meant so much to him, and he knew that it was such an important day in the history of not just basketball here, but in the history of our athletic department. Because what Coach Sutton brought to OSU in 1990 was a rejuvenation. Football was in the midst of a probation. Things just weren't, just kind of not a great time. And that rejuvenated and inspired an entire university, if not a community, in a lot of the state. And it was a great time for us.
Yeah, a couple of Final Four runs too in there somewhere along the way.
95 and 2004, and that hadn't happened since back
A
in
long
the
time.
it was, it's really something for everyone to be proud of.
And if I've done my math correctly, you were in your position the entire time Eddie was here. Coach Sutton was here.
I was, and there was so much anticipation when we knew that Coach Sutton was coming. And one of those figures that, and in sports we do this, and I'm not saying it's right. In fact, I know it's not right, but we make people bigger than they are, and and they become figures that are just bigger, larger than life. And we were all anticipating what it would be like when he got here. And when he did get here, and I met him that first day, he just put us all completely at ease. He had been on an incredibly large stage, and was certainly, we knew, was going to be a Hall of Fame coach. It took too long for that, but he just put us all at ease with his demeanor and his. Coach Sutton was not just a great basketball coach, but he was just a really decent human being, and so he made us all feel like that we were just right where we should be, and he was where he wanted to be. So it was great.
Well, I think he resigned like in May or June of 2006. Was that before or after you left the department?
It was right before I left. In fact, that was my last major function. He had come to me about, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks before, excuse me, and said he knew I was on my way out, and certainly he was too. But he said, I'd like for you to run this last press conference if you don't mind. And I said, of course I don't mind. That's what I want. And I considered him a friend. I certainly I miss his seeing him. He was just first of all, an incredible storyteller. And so at this time of year especially, I remember the NCAA tournament trips that we took when he would just hold court with 2 or 3 of us and just tell stories, from his career. It was a captivating story, and an incredible coach. And so this time of year especially, I remember his tenure here and what he meant to us. And I'm so happy. He would be so pleased that, with what's happening with basketball now, with Coach Boynton and the success they're having, and especially pleased that Scott and son Scott is part of that. And so I know he's happy.
Yeah, and then he would be happy. Well, the court's named after him. Correct. Yes.
As it, excuse me, as it should be. It may be a long time, and I certainly hope that Coach Boynton eclipses, his success, because that would be good for all of us. But it would be a long time before anyone has the same kind of success that he did. I mean, when you think about what he did, and the national rankings, the Final Fours, the Sweet 16s, the national attention, the bringing full houses back to Gallagher-Iba Arena and making the basketball atmosphere here unlike anything it had ever been, and still isn't back to that point. I think it's headed that way, but it's not back to that. Certainly, the pandemic hasn't helped that. But I know for everything that he did here, as far as I'm concerned, we can't give him enough.
And they raised the roof in 2001 was the grand opening, I think, wasn't it?
The 2000-2001 season was the first season in the new arena. Yeah.
I can remember one of the first games, they broke the black backboard.
Yeah, Jason Keep was the player's name, and
okay.
Jason was a big guy and really strong, and he went up and for a slam and broke the backboard, and it was kind of fitting for the occasion. We had to stop the game for a while and sweep up, but that's not the first time we'd seen that. We saw that in '95 in Seattle at the Final Four in the practice round before our first round game against UCLA. Big Country, Bryant Reed broke the backboard in practice. And of course, at Final Fours, the practices the day before are open. And so there were probably 25,000 people in the stands, and he shattered that backboard. And I still have pieces of that as actually. And it was quite the story for a while.
And would you write a story about it? Would that be part of your role to write about something like that?
Because the Final Four is such a, we didn't have, now absolutely because of social media and the internet and things that you control, as far as your website. We didn't have that in 95. And because the Final Four was such a heavily covered event, media from certainly all over Oklahoma and all over the country were there, so we didn't have to write it. We tried to guide the story a little bit, making sure they had access to the people that they needed to talk and tell the story. But no, we didn't have to write that.
Well, describe a typical day for us, if you can.
No, well, it varied. It would vary depending on the season. Football was my primary sport. I always had an assistant that would do basketball, and that's another piece of this story. I always tried to hire really top-notch assistants, but in order to do that, you had to offer them something other than just the day-to-day grind. So basketball, if you offered them to be the contact for men's basketball, that was a big deal, especially because Coach Sutton was here. And so football, which is just an all-encompassing thing, was my primary thing. And I would always do basketball as well, but not heavily until the postseason, because I had somebody here that needed to be able to do that, and they were learning how to do that, and that's why I brought Will Hancock here, and that's another story that we'll get into. So a typical day during football season would be starting pretty early, probably at work by 6:30 or 7, and catching up on email, overnight email and overnight correspondence, because about that time things were the news cycle hadn't totally gone 24/7, but it was close, and so they news media had questions almost constantly, and you were always on call, and so it was starting early. I usually tried to reserve the mornings for that kind of catch up, and then interdepartmental meetings, staff meetings, and things like that, because once afternoon came, football practice would start, and we didn't try to control things quite as much as they do now. Now, football, they don't, media doesn't have just a lot of access to what they do in terms of practice, and I understand why. And I wish we hadn't done it back then, but it was just a different time. So afternoon would be football practice and corralling the media. You had to make sure that if they were there, they were out of the way. And then after practice, which was normally 6:30 or so, coordinating interviews, making sure that they got to talk to whomever they needed if they were available. And then that would usually wrap up by 7, and then probably another hour, and home by 8, and get up the next morning and start all over.
A very long day.
It was a long day. It was very rewarding, and it was most of it was fun. So no complaints. But it was 7 days a week during football season, because you played on Saturday, and then Sunday was the day that you got ready for the next week. So all of our pre-game material, notes, the media notes, press releases for that next game, we had to produce on Sunday, and so Sunday was another fairly long day.
And would you type those, or did you have an assistant that would type them?
No, it got so large. Now they call it a notes package. I have a nephew that went to school here and worked for me in the media relations office, and he runs the show at the University of Alabama, and that's the biggest stage you can get in football. And I'm really proud of him, but they call it a notes package, and it's probably 40, 45, sometimes 50 pages long. And so one person can't do it all, so you would break it up into sections, and so it was a team effort. It usually took all hands on deck to produce that on Sunday and get it ready.
Times have changed quite a bit, yes. Now I guess they'd have their tablet in front of them and can type away as they're standing there.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. We didn't have that when I first came. It was all on a typewriter. We would do our copy on a manual on a typewriter. They weren't manual. They were electric, and then we would turn our copy into our administrative assistant, who would then put it on a larger typewriter where it just looked better, and she could justify everything and made it look very presentable. So, and then it would go to the Xerox, and we'd watch that run all day, and then it had to be the Xerox didn't collate or staple, so we had to do that ourselves. Those were the good old days.
Good old days. Well, are there a highlight or two from those 23 years?
No.
There's a lot of them, I'm sure.
I wouldn't know where to start. I mean, there are so many. I think the highlight for me would be the relationships over the years, the people that you meet, and the people that make an influence, that have an influence. And the athletes are the ones that I can remember, they're the reason that we're here, first of all, because they're students first, and that's why any of us are here. But the ones who came through, and I can mention so many. I mean, Barry Sanders would be probably right there at the top of the list. To have a chance to go through that '88 season with him as a Heisman Trophy candidate, and then a Heisman Trophy winner, and then basically traveling the country with him as he, picked up all of his awards after the season, and, helping orchestrate that whole thing. I'll never forget that. And Barry is just a special person. And he's another one that is not just, in my mind, not even arguably is the best player to ever play the sport at any position, period. And he's also just a genuinely nice man. And so I have a lot of respect for him. But it didn't stop there. Thurman Thomas is another one that was here. The relationship with Coach Sutton, the relationship with, Pat Jones, who was the coach. Actually, Jimmy Johnson was the coach when I got here, and then Pat Jones, and he and I became friends. Just the numbers of student athletes and coaches that have come through that just will impact me as long as I live. I mean, I remember conversations and situations that will forever be part of who I am professionally.
And that's what made January 27th, 2001 so difficult.
Yes. Well, yes.
Are you ready to get into that?
Whenever you are. Yeah.
Well, let's move into that, and we'll see how we go with there. What do you recall from that day? Take us through that date as you want to.
Well, it would probably go back to the day before, because and I'll set the stage by talking a little bit about Will Hancock, who was my assistant, and I had hired Will in the early 90s. His wife Karen was here as the soccer coach, and he was working at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. And I knew they wanted desperately to be together, and I had an opening, and it just seemed natural. We obviously had to go through a process, but Will was by far the most qualified person for the job. I mean, he came from such good stock. Bill Hancock, his dad, who's currently director of the college football playoff, and was the director of the NCAA basketball tournament, and has a media relations background. So Will was an obvious hire. But the day before, I just remember Will leaving. We were in temporary offices at the time because Gallagher Iowa was still being done, and our offices weren't complete. So we were at Frontier Engineering west of Stillwater, and I just remember Will coming in and getting his bags and going to the airport, and it's just so normal. That's just what happened, that he knew that that's what I was asking him to do, was to travel with basketball. So he went and got on that airplane, and you don't even think about it. It's just what we do. Mm-hmm. I had personally been on those planes hundreds of times in my career. That's in basketball. That's how you did things. You got on smaller planes and you went. I didn't think anything else about it until about 8:00 on that Saturday night. I did watch the game. The game we lost to Colorado, and I can remember the day in Stillwater was cold, and and rainy and it sleeted and it was just not it wasn't a very nice day at all, and it got worse. And I just remember getting a call at about 8 o'clock that Saturday night, and there was a writer from the Associated Press in Denver. And I remember his words. He said, he said, I'm sorry to bother you, and I don't mean to be cryptic, but do you know if all of your planes got home from Colorado, your basketball? And that caught me by complete surprise. It was like, no, I don't know. I don't know. And I said, why are you asking? And he said, I'm so sorry. He said, I have to stay pretty cryptic. And I said, okay. And it was one of those calls that you hung up the phone and it was like, something's not right.
Mm-hmm.
There's something not right. And probably hadn't been, I was actually digesting it with my wife at the time. Probably hadn't been more than a minute. And the same person called back and he said, I can be a little bit more descriptive now. He said, there's been a plane crash and we think that the tail number matched one of the planes that from your team's for your team plane. And like, okay. And so at that point I started making some phone calls and nobody really knew anything and they hadn't heard anything at all. And I didn't really want to alarm anyone else. So I remember going to the airport. I left the house and went to the airport. And when I got to the airport, the plane that Coach Sutton was on had just landed and he was walking into the terminal. And I said to him, so are you aware that, that the other plane isn't here? And he said, yeah. He said, I did hear that. He said, I think they just had some problems and they were going to have to land somewhere and get some maintenance. And I thought, okay, well that maybe that makes sense. And he went on, and no sooner than he got out of the building than I just remember my phone lighting up, and then it became apparent that something had gone incredibly wrong. And my counterpart at the University of Colorado, David Platty, who's still there, called and confirmed that one of the planes had crashed. And he didn't have a lot of details, but he said, it's my understanding that no one survived, but he didn't know that for a fact. And at that point, it just, the world just turned upside down. Mm-hmm. It just turned upside down. And it's amazing how, I guess, you understand that you have a job to do, and that you're getting paid to do it. And you also understand that, boy, this hurts a lot, and I don't even know the details. But first thing I did was I went to the parking lot at the airport because I knew what car. Coach Sutton hadn't said who was on the plane. I didn't know who was on the plane. I didn't get that much detail, but I knew what kind of car Will drove, and I knew what kind of car Bill Teagans drove. Bill Teagans was probably my best friend at that time. And he was on that airplane, and he had not been on that plane earlier in the week. There wasn't going to be room for him, and Bill and I talked every day. And Bill called me early in the week, and he was whining, and he said, "I got to get on that plane. You got to get me on that team plane." And I talked to Coach Sutton, and he said, "I don't think there's any way. We're full." And so Bill had purchased a commercial ticket to go to fly to Denver, and that commercial ticket was still on his car. And so I recognized Will's car and Bill's car, so I knew at that point that they were both on the airplane. And your first instinct at that point, I would like to tell you that everything just fell in line, and it's like, okay, here's what we do. Okay, we've got a checklist, and you do A, B, C, D, and E. But you don't. At that point, there weren't manuals written for this. Mm-hmm. You talked about crisis management, but you didn't. It was like, okay, well, yeah, whatever. But okay, here it is. And so what do you do? And my first instinct was, and I'll never forget that I told my wife, my first instinct was I would just like to get in my car and drive away. and just not come back, because that's just was the thought that I had, but can't do that. And so I called at that point. Terry Don Phillips was the athletic director at the time, and he called me and he said he wanted to know if I knew what was going on. And I said, I know some, but I don't know much. So I went and got him at his home, and we went straight to the basketball offices, which were in Cordell Hall at the time, because their offices were being renovated in Gallagher, Iowa. So they were on the second floor of Cordell. And we got there, and the mood was just, it was just unlike anything I had seen. The players who were back were, most were in tears. They were up and down the hallways. There were quite a few girlfriends and other friends in the building, and they were in the same state. And I remember Coach Sutton, when Terry Don Phillips and I first got there, he had just gotten off the phone, I guess, with officials from the FAA and also from the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, and there was confirmation that the plane had crashed, and there was fairly good confirmation that no one had survived. And I just remember him with his head in his hands. But he didn't stay there long. He got up and started making phone calls, and he called. I believe he got a hold of 8 of the 10 families that night, that evening, and shared the news with them. And of course, by that time, it was already starting to catch on as far as the national news. And I remember in Coach Sutton's office, it was Coach Sutton and President Halligan and Terry Don Phillips and myself and Harry Birdwell, who at the time was the Vice President for Administration and Finance, later became the athletic director. But, and there was just, what do we do? Families notified? Yes. Okay. Well, the next thing that you have to do is you have to think about how do we handle this from the media standpoint? What do we do? And I have always been, my philosophy has always been that the more transparent that you can be and the more forthcoming and the more timely that you can be with any news like that, the better it is. And so we wanted to make sure we knew enough to have a press conference. And we felt like we did. And so we decided that needed to be the next step, because there were already live TV trucks from all over Oklahoma and even some national that had already gotten to Stillwater. And so I remember going out. They weren't actually allowed in the actual office area. They were downstairs because the weather wasn't very good. And I remember going downstairs and announcing to them that we would have a press conference at the airport. To this day, I don't know why we chose the airport. I don't know. I can't remember. It seemed odd to me that they were there already and we could have done it there, but we chose the airport. And so we went to the airport. I want to think it was probably around 10:30 or 11 o'clock. And at that point, we had the names of everyone on the plane, and we had a press conference there. And Dr. Halligan spoke briefly, became very emotional. Terry Don Phillips tried to speak. I think he got one sentence out, and his voice broke, and he just couldn't go. And then I announced the names of the people who were on the plane, and hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Just because you knew every one of them, and especially with Will and Bill, it was like this. You're thinking that this can't be real, but it was. And from that point, we convened an athletic department staff meeting in our main conference room back at Frontier Engineering. And I think we started the meeting at around midnight, and the entire meeting was, okay, here's what we know, here's what do we do? And to a person, everyone in the room, and it started with President Halligan, who said, no matter what we do, these families have to be our first priority. But whatever happens after that, we can talk about. But the first thing we're going to talk about is how do we take care of these families. And so it didn't take long to come up with a plan that everybody, well, not everybody, but 10 of us in the room would be assigned a family, and that would be our responsibility. Above and beyond anything else that we did, we still had other things to do, but our job was to take care of that family as best we could, to make sure that they knew what was going on, that they had questions we could answer, and to be there with them if they wanted us there, and just to help hold their hand literally and figuratively as we walked through what was going to be a very difficult time. And so we did that, and then we talked about okay, how often do we communicate? How often do we have press conferences? And we decided at first that twice a day probably would be legit, because the national media was certainly, now it wasn't just local media, it was the national media. So we did press conferences. I think we did 2 each day on Sunday and Monday, and then went back to one. And I felt like that we were managing the information flow pretty well. There were a lot of questions. Nobody knew what happened. Obviously, they had to investigate the crash. And of course, the media wants to know now, okay, what happened? Was it weather? Was it pilot? Was it what? And you don't know. And so it's like, no, we don't know. And the NTSB will release that information to you when they investigate. And then they wanted to know who owned the planes, and and then they got into travel policies and all that. And it was just we managed the information well. It was just very difficult day after day to face them. And then the questions were, okay, are you going to play? We had a game scheduled for, I think it was Tuesday of that week with Texas Tech. And are you going to play? And Coach Sutton immediately came to the right decision that no, we wouldn't play that game. But the team unanimously said we want to play after that. So our the next game after that was a home game against Missouri, and they voted unanimously to play it, and did, and won. And that's another piece of the story. But from that point on, it was then okay, we're managing the press, and then what do we do as far as a memorial service, which we planned and had later that week, and then most of us went to most, if not all, of those funerals, and the entire week was just I don't even know how to describe it. Almost out of body, almost surreal. It's like, is this? How can this really be happening? And then reality sets in, and you say, no, it is happening. And so keep doing your job and take care of these families. And I had Janice Tegan, Bill's wife, who I knew, and so Janice and her daughter Amanda, who Bill dearly loved, called her Amanda. And so my job was to keep up with them. And so my wife and I drove to Edmond several times just to be with them. And then I walked her into the memorial service. But when she first heard about the crash, she was a flight at the time. She was a flight attendant for Delta Airlines, and she was in Atlanta in the hotel room. And when she first heard about the crash, it jolted her that what she had remembered is that Bill was going commercial, and that because that's the last that she had heard. And so that was a difficult one when she found out that no, he actually didn't go commercially, that he was able to get on the plane. And so we went through the week, and then from the media relations standpoint, it was okay. We have work to do, but now here's this huge void that Will left, because he was the contact for men's basketball. And so who's going to do that, and how do we get this done? And of course, I ran the department, and so a lot of that obviously fell to me. But I had a great staff of people that just stepped in and absolutely, I think we had four or five full-time assistants, and then 10 student assistants, and they all just stepped up and just did incredible work through so much pain. And I don't know how we did it, but we got it done. And we had a lot of help. In fact, during the memorial service, I remember the day before, or 2 days before the memorial service, Don Tomkowski, who is the media relations director still at the University of Texas, called me and he said, "How are y'all going to do that with your staff, your media relations staff? Who's not going to get to go?" And I said, "I hadn't even thought about it." And he said, "Well, here's what we're going to do." He said, "I'm bringing my staff over, and we will man your office during that memorial service." And it was just random acts of kindness like that I remember. We're not supposed to like OU, okay? They're
The school down south, yes.
School down south, but they were just so compassionate and just wanted to know how to help. And probably maybe a week or so after the memorial service, I got a 2-page letter from Kelvin Sampson, who was the coach of OU, and it was one of the most poignant letters I've ever gotten. And he had handwritten it, and it meant so much to me. And then when we had played OU that year, or right after the plane crash, their players wore orange T-shirts that had all 10 names on them during warm up. And so this transcended the game. This transcended the rivalry. This transcended, winning and losing. This was a tragedy, a human tragedy, and everybody reacted very positively.
And then from that, I remember I was reading that President Halligan at the memorial service made the statement that we'd never forget, promised to never forget.
Yeah.
So can you talk about some of the things that the university has done to honor that?
It was a pledge that we all took, and it has stuck. We will never forget. Now, the problem with that statement is that we're now 20 years out, and the years keep going by, and current students at OSU, a lot of them have no idea what you're talking about when you mention the plane crash. They might remember the women's basketball plane crash, which was an equal tragedy, but they said, "Now wait a minute, there was another one?" Yeah, there was. And the further we get from it, the I don't want to say the more difficult, but the more of a challenge it's going to be to keep that memory going. And so we as a university, and it won't be long before all of us who were actually associated with it that night aren't going to be here. And so what do we do now to make sure that those things that we said we would do will stay in perpetuity? And Dr. Halligan put most of them in place. And the memorial in the lobby obviously isn't going anywhere. The memorial in Colorado, outside of Strasburg, Colorado, isn't going anywhere. I know that it's signed. I know that it's officially whoever succeeds, even President Hargis now, when they're gonna know that on that anniversary date that the library chimes ring 10 times at 5:37 or whatever that is, and we will. I know that the basketball office here is committed to making sure that every year on that nearest game to January 27th, that nearest home game, that there's a remembrance. Currently, we didn't do it this year because of COVID, but generally we have the families back, and the athletic department is gracious to host all the families for a dinner prior to the game, and then we all sit together and the families are recognized during the game. There are some other things too, like the Remember the 10 run, which I serve on the steering committee for that, and that is set, and it will happen every year, hopefully in perpetuity, and that's another way that will help. And the families have latched onto that. Most of them come back and participate, and they run with the names of their loved one on their shirts, and it's become just a really moving thing. So with all of those things, and I think we're set up to never forget. 50 years from now, I can't answer that question. I can say, but in 50 years, I think that I think that the library bells will still chime 10 times, and I think there will be more people who say, why is that happening? And we just want to make sure that there are enough things written and enough things historically around to commemorate that day that those who are interested can go find out and read about it and say, yes, okay, that's what happened. And that commitment to never forget will carry on. And there are a couple of examples of how they've done that. Marshall University, who had a tragic plane crash in 1970 when they lost most, if not all, of their football team. That was 31 years before this, and they still every year on that date they still have a memorial service and a remembrance on their campus, and it's set. And so it can be done, and it will be done, because that was our promise to never forget.
And then they just did scholarships. There's at least a few. I don't know if there's one for each person or not, but
I don't know that either. I know there's a scholarship. I know there's scholarship for Will, scholarship for Brian Lewinstra, who was the trainer, and I'm going to forget. I think Pat Noyes. I know there's a scholarship for Nate Fleming, who was one of the players, and there may be others that I'm not remembering. But yes, there are a number of those set up. And thank you for that reminder. There will also be, that's something that'll be here forever too.
Going forward.
Cool on a scholarship named after one of them.
Were you involved in their decision as to where to put the memorial here on campus?
Yeah,
to put it inside?
Yes, there was a lot of talk about it, but it just seemed like that it needed to be somewhere where fans had access. Outside was, I remember outside was discussed, but it was like, okay, well, in bad weather, people aren't going to linger. And in that lobby, people have a chance, I think, to linger. And it also worked out well because generally in a normal non-pandemic year, there are a lot of people that go through that lobby and a lot of flowers that are left, at that memorial. And so I think having it indoors and having it in that lobby just made a lot of sense. And I'm glad it worked out that way. And the memorial in Colorado was very striking as well. I've been there twice, and it for me it takes my breath away. Because it's just it's where they the last thing they saw was that field, and it's just very well done, and it's very peaceful and it's very quiet, and it's very, very fitting of those 10 guys.
And I've noticed, I have not been to it, but I've noticed for both of them, they have a plaque that kind of gives people a little bit of background information.
Sure. Who are they?
Like who are they and when and what happened and the miles from Colorado to here.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Done nicely. And then do you think these annual commemorances help the family members?
I do.
Do you?
I hear that from them. I actually hear that from them face to face. They above anyone, they don't want their loved ones to be forgotten, because that's a permanent hole in their heart, and that hole is never going to be filled. And that's the thing that people. I had an interesting conversation this year. I don't mean to digress, but I remember this conversation this year. Somebody that I worked with in athletics at the time emailed me on the 27th and said, "I'm thinking about you today. When will this ever be? Will we ever get over this?" And I thought about that for a minute, and I thought, you know what? I don't want to get over it. I don't want to get over it, because if I get over it, then the opportunity for me to forget becomes even enhanced. And so, that night, those guys, especially Bill and Will, but all of them, they left a hole in all of us who were associated with either them or the program. And yes, it's better. The healing has come as it has come to the families, but I don't ever want that. I don't ever want that hole to go away, because it's too much of who we are. And I think that particular night I talked earlier about OSU being such a special place, but I think that night OSU became even more special. And I know sometimes in the face of tragedy, people respond differently. But this community, this university, this state responded so incredibly to that. And I think OSU became a tighter family because of that. And I tell people today, there have been some, even in fairly high places, that have said, I'd just rather forget this. We can't forget this. We can't forget this. This is who we are. This plane crash, the Kurt Budke plane crash, this is part of our DNA. And this is one of the things that it isn't a happy thing, but it's one of the things that help define who OSU is as a close-knit family. And so we don't want it to go away. I wish it had never happened, but it did. And now, and because it has happened, then our responsibility is to make sure that we carry that burden. And they wasn't personally related to any one of them, but I felt related, because of the closeness that you have. But no, I don't want that hole to be. I need it to stay.
Are there certain times or places or sounds or whatever that remind you of some of these men? Just immediately take you?
Every day, maybe not every day, but a lot of days when I look at my phone, generally at about this time, about 2:00, because that's about the time I would talk to Bill Teagans almost every day. And he would call me, and we would talk. We would probably talk for 20 minutes, but the first 5 minutes was just, kind of adolescent chatter, and we just have fun. And I just remember his laugh and his cackle and how much he enjoyed life. And we both dearly loved baseball. We're baseball fans, and we would argue baseball and talk baseball. And so I'm reminded of that pretty much regularly. Anytime I hear classical music, I think of Will, because he was a classical music freak. He loved it. Probably the smartest guy that I will ever know. He had his act together. He was so cultured, and he knew so many things. So when I hear classical music, I think of Will, and certainly still see Karen from time to time, and his daughter Andy, who was 3 months old at the time, 2 months old at the time. She's following right in his footsteps. She's studying journalism at Northwestern. And that apple didn't fall far from the tree, and she's brilliant, just like he was. So no, I'm reminded a lot. I can safely say that in 20 years there's not a day that's gone by that I haven't thought about one or more of them.
How often do you go by the memorial in the arena?
Not much anymore, because I'm not there. My office is about it. But now that I'm not there, it's probably half a dozen times a year, depending on how many basketball games that I go to. But I'm not ever in the building where that I don't make sure that I go by.
Have you participated in the run?
I'm on the committee, and so I work. I'm part of the workforce for the run, but I'm not a runner. I don't know why people run. It hurts. No, I know why people run. But no, I'm involved in it, and I want to be involved in it. But I would rather volunteer, and I think most years my wife and I hand out medals at the finish line.
And this past year, 2020, it was a virtual one, I think, wasn't it, because of the pandemic?
The pandemic, and we're set for August 28th, I believe, this year, and we're counting on going full steam ahead.
Back to face to face. Let's hope so. What have been a few things that have helped you cope with?
Well, obviously, my faith. I mean, it's a personal part of it, but my faith. I don't know what I would have done without it. My family, my wife was a rock through the whole thing, and still is, and so she understood, what was going on. I think the understanding from colleagues at the time and still even today, I hear from a lot of them even now. Even though I'm not still in the profession, and even though it's been 20 years, I'll still hear from them on that day. And I got a great email this year from a young lady who was a student worker on my staff that year, and I hadn't heard from her since she left. And she sent me the most incredible email about what that time meant to her, in terms of just watching how everybody handled it. And we did try to be sensitive to. It wasn't just, you didn't have to have a title in front of your name to be impacted by this. Those students in our office loved Will, and they were hurt deeply. And I know one of the things that we made sure that we did is that week following, we worked with university counseling to make sure we had counselors in our office at least 3 days that week, where our students could talk to them if they needed to. And you think that's such a small deal, but she mentioned that in her letter. She said, you all didn't have to do that, but you did. And I just remember after the first basketball game, after the crash, the first home game, I just gathered everybody together in our meeting room. And there were 20 of us, I guess. And I just said, I don't have really anything to say to you all, except I just want to look at your eyes. I want to see how you are. And I want you to know how much you're loved and how much you mean to us, and we know what you're going through. And then there was just silence, but it was okay.
Through the years, have other universities and things invited you to come speak on this topic to share some?
Early on, yes, not so much lately. I know that there were a couple of people that in the profession that were doing master's thesis or other thesis about this kind of thing, and they both came and spent quite a bit of time with me, and I have spoken about it, but it had, those opportunities have dwindled over the years.
Mm-hmm. Lessons learned.
Never think that you're insulated from anything, from any kind of tragedy. If you think it won't happen to you, you're wrong. And if you think it can't happen to us as a university or even happen again, you're wrong. And because it has happened to me. And it's unimaginable to me to think that we've gone through that twice.
Yes.
It's just unimaginable to me. And I was already out of the department for the second one, but it hurt. And I knew Coach Budke, but it hurt as well. So I think the lessons are, make sure as best you can. And I'm still not sure there are any manuals written on how to handle it. Okay. I know there are crisis management documents and things that you do and check a list, but when you get involved in something like this, all of a sudden, there's a difference between checking a list and checking my heart, checking on a person and making sure that, someone's okay. And so you better, just understand as best you can and learn from what's happened. And then I would hope that like OSU did for the women's basketball crash and for the homecoming tragedy and all of that, that the model is there to take care of people first. Take care of people first, and then everything else after that.
Yeah. And then after that, they did a task force for travel policy. Were you involved with any of that?
I was. It just had to happen to look at why we did what we did, and nobody was at fault. I mean, and like I said, the events, what happened to the airplane has been documented and had problems, and unfortunately, those things happen. I mean, they just do. But we had to assess why we were doing that. And like I said, I've gotten on one of those airplanes hundreds of times to go on a basketball trip, and flying doesn't bother me. It never has, and it never bothered me to get on one, and it doesn't bother me to get on one today. But you had to make sure that your process was tight, that everything was checked out. The planes were, how do you do this? And so it was good that we did it. And I know that has been I don't know now because I'm no longer over there, but I know that for a while that the travel policy that we developed after the plane crash became a model for departments across the country. And Coach Sutton said even after the crash, they said, when we were talking about that next road trip, which was to Kansas, and we took 3 airplanes. And they were all 3 jets. They decided not to take any kind of a prop airplane, and now they go to charter a larger plane. But he said, I would get on another King Air today. He said, it's a safe airplane. What happened was unfortunate, but he said but I have a tendency to agree with him, and that was another piece of this. After we knew we were going to Kansas, and Rick Riley, who's a really famous writer, he wrote for Sports Illustrated for years, and he's gone politically. He's gone political, and I still enjoy reading his stuff. But he was probably as popular and as read a sports writer as there was in the time. And he called me the Monday before we went to Kansas, and he said, I'm going to ask you this, and say no, but he said, I want to go with you on your first trip, your first airplane trip. He said, I want to go. And I said, well, I can't answer that question, but Coach Sutton, I'll have to ask him. So I walked down to Coach Sutton's office and told him what Rick wanted to do. And Coach Sutton said, if he wants to go, tell him, sure, come on. And so he did. He joined us on that trip to Kansas. And every once in a while I go back and I read the story that he wrote. It was excellent. It was excellent. And it just had to do with the human side of it. And yes, this basketball team suffered an incredible loss. This university suffered an incredible loss, and then they all got back on airplanes and went and played another game. Mm-hmm. I just thought he captured both the human side and the other side of it. That team wanted to keep playing. Well, in order to keep playing, they had to travel, and so it was hard, but we did it.
Mm-hmm. Do you recall the point when things kind of felt like they were back to normal? I mean, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know that
a turning point.
Certainly, as the years have gone on, the hurt isn't as acute. Certainly. And that's part of, I think that's part of just a grieving process. My personal problem was that because of the job and the things that I needed to do professionally, I don't think I ever grieved the way that I should have. And I actually had a counselor, because I did seek counseling. I actually had a counselor. And so I think that hurt me early on, but I don't know how to push a button and make yourself do that. And so that, it was like, okay, that's great. How do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
Because there just wasn't a time in that first year. There just wasn't a time where you could just say, okay, I'm shutting down for a while. You just don't have that luxury. And so there are, like I say, it isn't as acute. There are still times today, and I'm shocked that we've done this whole interview and I haven't had to stop, which is a good sign. But there are still times, even now. This year, I don't know what it was this year that they hit me particularly hard, and it was, and I know it's coming every year, and I say, okay, this year it's going to be, maybe it's not going to be quite as painful, but it is. And like I said before, that's okay. Mm-hmm. That's okay.
Yeah, that's being human and having a heart. Yeah, which cowboys do.
Cowboys do.
Right.
Big orange ones.
Big orange, yes. Well, then let's fast forward a little bit and kind of wrap this up. What led to your decision to switch career?
I'd done it for so long, 28 years, counting the 5 initially, and we had leadership change in the department, and it just seemed like that. I had worked for five different athletic directors, and I think five different presidents while I was in athletics, and it just seemed like a time that made sense. And the other thing was that with the news, the changing of the news cycle, we talked earlier about, it was transitioning into a 24/7. Well, by 2006, it was truly 24/7, and you couldn't, you never felt like that you could turn your phone on. And I remember getting a call one night. It was like 3 o'clock in the morning well, actually, I remember who it was from. It's from Bob Berry Jr., who isn't with us anymore, but he was the sports director of Channel 4 and a great guy. I worked with his dad when he was our play-by-play voice, and I loved the family. He called me at 3 o'clock in the morning, and he said, I'm following up on an internet rumor about one of your football players who might have gotten in trouble. And I wasn't upset with him, but the whole situation just caused me to really think, now, wait a minute. You're calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning, following up on an internet rumor about a football player that might have been in trouble. And I remember asking him, and I knew the answer to this. I don't know why I asked him. But I said, Bobby, why do you have to call me at this hour to find that out? And he said, because if I don't, and my competitor at Channel 5 or Channel 9 does and gets the story, then I get in trouble. Mm-hmm. And it made sense to me. But then it also made sense to me that I didn't have to play that game. And it's kind of scary to think, okay, this is all you've ever done. All right. So, I was 50 years old at the time. Can I reinvent myself? And I had a lot of encouragement from my wife and some others, and they said, no, you can do something else. You can take, a lot of what we do professionally. At the end of the day, are people skills. And I'm not saying that I'm great at anything, but I entered into discussions with Kirk Jewell, who at the time was the president of the foundation, OSU Foundation, and things just worked. And they had a position that was good for me, and they hired me. And I spent 7 years at the foundation and learned some incredible skills there. I would have thought that I could never be a good fundraiser until I found out that fundraising is all about relationships. And, first of all, you don't go ask somebody that can't afford to give. That would be a mistake. But then if you can build a relationship, and if you can hit on their passion or why they love their university, then you might have something going. And so I thoroughly enjoyed that time at the foundation. And then the opportunity, this opportunity at public safety came along in 2015, and it was just, I don't know, it was just something I had known the people here for a long time. And Chief Robinson, who was my boss, had been here, and I just really admired the work they do. And I thought, you know what, that might be a great way, a few years, and I could retire. I'm not. This is going to sound vain. In a year and a half, I will have been at OSU 40 years, and I like that sound. To have been some 40 years, and so I'd like to make it to then, and then I'll be. If I still feel the way I do now, and they keep working, if they'll have me, but I could retire and say, you know what, this has been good. But who knows? But so that's sort of my story after athletics. And I tell people all the time, I did it backwards. You're supposed to have that changing work history, excuse me, early in your career, and I had it late in mine. But that's just the way it happened for me.
And you chose to stay at OSU all that time. Did someone try to pull you away?
Several times, and no, I wouldn't go.
Yeah.
I had a chance to go to, OU early in my career, and that was a non-starter. I appreciated the call. I appreciated them thinking that whatever, but I couldn't do it. And then I had a chance to go to Michigan State, and I didn't go there. And then not very long ago, I had a chance to get into the private sector, and I was intrigued but not intrigued enough to make OSU's been too good to me. And it's like I said before, this place does something to you when you're here. It's just such a special place. I've never, I love my alma mater, but I don't get the same feeling there that I get here. And I didn't go to school here. I just love the spirit of this is, people here just, for the most part, are just real. And I like that.
Do you have a favorite spot on campus?
Well, I love the formal gardens, outside the student union in front of the library. I love to be over there. Anything around Theta Pond is just, it's just so pretty. And as ugly as our offices are, I love being here, because this is where it happens for me. But no, that's the other thing. I'm so sorry. The other thing about our campus is that it's so aesthetically pleasing and getting more so all the time. And so anywhere on campus is fine with me.
I have covered all of my questions. Is there anything that I haven't known to ask that you want to add?
No, you've done a really good job. This is great. I would just reemphasize from the very beginning that the commitment that we made to never forget. I don't think we can say that enough. We those of us who were part of it, those who are here now who weren't part of it, but now have an opportunity to learn. I encourage them to do that and to understand how deeply woven into our fiber that night is even today.
Mm-hmm. Well, since we're talking a little bit about history, what would you like history to say about Steve Buzzard?
Oh my goodness! You know what? Oh boy, that's a tough question.
I ask that for a lot of people. So
I think that if at some level that I'm remembered as someone that was loyal to the school and and made a difference if I just made a difference in one young person's life, I'd be happy with it. And I do mentor quite a bit through my church, and I love the interaction with young men, as they're going through life processes, and most of our interactions are about girls because girls confuse them. But no, I'm kidding. But no, I think if I could just be known as someone who was loyal, tried really hard to never compromise, myself morally or ethically, and made a difference in the lives of young people, I'm happy with that.
Okay. And I told it like it was.
I like that too. We sure tried. I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't trade it. It's been a great run, and it's easy. Sometimes it's hard for me to look back, realizing that 98% of it's behind me. I'm not sure that I ever realized that I would be this old, but I am.
Yeah. And the journey's been mostly up. I mean, it's mostly, for the most part, been positive.
Yes, it has.
Yes,
well,
yes.
even this that we talked about, and if people haven't read Bill Hancock's book, Will's Dead, he wrote a book after the plane crash called Riding with the Blue Moth.
Mm-hmm.
And it was how Bill and his wife Nikki handled their grief. And they drove to the East Coast, and he dipped his big toe in the Atlantic Ocean, and then he got on his bicycle and rode the length of the country and dipped his toe in the Pacific Ocean. And it took a long time to do it, but his book chronicles the people that he met along the way and how they truly ministered to his soul, but it was the blue moth that followed him, and that blue moth was the grief of losing Will And then, the more they rode, that blue moth sort of, faded. It's a great book, and I always think of that. The blue moth is probably going to be there, okay, but there's so much. It's hard to say this, Tanya, and I don't want anybody to mistake this, but there's so much good that can come from tragedy. But you have to let it. You have to let it. You have to celebrate the lives that were lost. You have to understand that to a man, none of them would have wanted us to sit around here and mope and cry for weeks and weeks. They wanted life to go on. And that's what's happening. As long as we can do that and not forget them, that's good.
That's good. Well, anything else you want to add?
I think that's it. I think you listened to me drone on for too long.
No, you've done well. I want to finish with a quote that reportedly you said during the 2006, during the 5th anniversary in 2006, if I may.
Sure.
Okay. The images, the emotions of that night will live with us as long as we have breath. But each new sunrise and each new season has brought even sharper and more beautiful memories of the 10 incredible men that we lost that night.
Mm-hmm.
So
you just got me.
Yeah. Thank you for remembering with us today and for sharing how these 10 men continue to touch you and others, even in their physical absence.
Thank you, Tanya.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.